Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. I upload videos once a week, a mixture of bookish and lifestyle content, and for today's video I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read in the month of November, and didn't actually read that much in November, so it should be a pretty short and concise video. And honestly, I don't know what happened because I have been killing it with the number of books that I've been managing to read. It's almost like I looked at my Goodreads goal, realised I was almost there, and then just hit an absolute wall when it came to wanting to pick books up and read them. I don't know. But I'm going to talk about the books that I did manage to read nonetheless, so let's jump in. The first book that I picked up was Vala by John Gwynne. This is adult high fantasy, and it is the second book in a series known as The Faithful and the Fallen. And if you missed me talking about the first book, the reason that I am reading this series is because my husband James has recommended it to me multiple times. Has literally gone on and on and on about me picking this up, and so I'm slowly making my way through the series because the books are huge. So as I said, this is adult high fantasy. It very much takes its inspiration from the likes of Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, in that we are following multiple characters, multiple POVs. The stories take place at various different locations in the land that this series is set in. There is politics, there is magic, there are creatures of old, there are pirates. There's just a whole lot that takes place within these books, and obviously I can't talk too much about what this particular book is because that would spoil the storyline of the first book, but I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of what the series is roughly about. We have a very basic storyline where we're following our main protagonist, who is a young boy called Corbin, and at the beginning of the first book we meet Corbin on the precipice of becoming a man, becoming a warrior, which is all that he has wanted from his life. And then basically Corbin's world as he knows it implodes, and there is all kinds of upheaval. And then we have a kind of overarching bigger storyline that involves the gods of this land and a war between good and evil and right and wrong. One of the things that James said to me before I picked this series up was that it's very tropey. He said it's very, very enjoyable, but it's very tropey, and that is so true. It's like the author took every fantasy trope that is known and threw it into the mix with these books. And the thing is, tropes become tropes, I guess, because they are enjoyable and readers respond well to them, so there's nothing wrong with that. And I think if you can just kind of accept that and go with it, then you'll find the series to be rather enjoyable. Certainly I am finding that to be the case. I would say for this particular book, without giving any spoilers away, it definitely felt like a filler book. It took a long time before something happened, something worthwhile and something that contributed to the bigger story happened. As I said, we're following a lot of different characters, and so it does take a long time to kind of pick up and follow each of their segments of their story, but it just took a very long time. And it's not that I got bored, but I just was kind of feeling like I know it's going to happen. There's the anticipation there that something needs to happen, and I just wished that it had got there a little bit quicker. And I think that is probably the case. Well, I know from my experience that is the case often with trilogies or series where there are multiple books, where you often have these filler books where the author is expanding on story arcs, and he is or they are building the world a little bit more, or contributing, you know, just expanding and developing and building and laying groundwork, but the books become very much like filler books, and that pretty much happened here. I mean, what takes place in the last section definitely made me want to pick up the next book ASAP, and on the whole it's very enjoyable. It's extremely readable. I think even if you're not familiar with high fantasy, this is definitely a book or a series that you could pick up and get into because it's not complex in that way. Everything is really well developed and really well explained. On the whole, very enjoyable, very much looking forward to where the next book in the series is going to go. as with George R.R. Martin, John Gwynne is not afraid to be brutal with his characters. He writes them very realistically. What takes place with some of them is just harrowing and brutal and devastating, and sometimes, but also there is a lot of hope, and there is a lot of love, and there is a lot of joy amongst everything else that is kind of taking place. So yeah, on the whole, very enjoyable. Very much looking forward to continuing with this series. Then I picked up SSGB by Len Deighton, and this is a book that I was really excited to read. It's historical fiction, and it is basically a detective murder mystery, but set in a time or a world where the Germans have won the Second World War. So Britain has been invaded by Germany. The Nazis are now the ruling government in England. And to me, that just sounds so fascinating. It's like a dystopian setting mixed with a detective murder mystery. And so I was very much looking forward to going into this book. But it was just not for me. It felt like an absolute flop based on the blurb and based on what I was expecting to be able to read. It was so boring. Basically, the author, I think, and I kind of gathered from the bit at the beginning about him, he must write non-fiction, he must write historical non-fiction, so his knowledge base is huge. But what the book basically became was him throwing in lots of terminology, lots of political names and phrasings, and he explains in great detail the way that the German political system is set up, and the conflict between the army and the Nazi party and the government in Berlin, and just all the different factions. But it was just so mind-numbing. It didn't really contribute to the story part, other than to say, look how accurate I'm being with how this would play out. And the actual murder mystery part of the story is a really small element of what takes place. The characters are okay. I liked our main detective character, who is Inspector Archer, but again I felt like he was a little bit underdeveloped. It honestly felt like what the author had wanted to do was write a non-fiction version of what the world would have been like had Germany won World War II, and then injected a fictitious element into it. I don't know if that makes sense. It's like it's written like a non-fiction, but obviously it's not. Yeah, it just wasn't that interesting, and it wasn't that entertaining, and it very much felt like the author just wanted to throw all this jargon at us. And so what he actually created was quite a mundane look at what life would have been like if the Nazis had succeeded and taken over Britain. And as I say, the murder mystery element of it almost becomes just second place. Like it doesn't even do that. It falls literally off the radar and then gets wrapped up really hastily at the end. And I was just so disappointed, because I felt like on the surface this book could have gone so many different places. It could have been absolutely fantastic. It could have been one of my favourite reads, because the concept just sounds so good. But yeah, I think I gave this like 2 stars on Goodreads. It took me ages and ages to get through it. I had no desire to pick it up, other than thinking, surely this book's gonna pick up soon. So just a bit of a flop for me. I think if you're interested in the more technical side of Nazi Germany and the bureaucracy of Nazi Germany, you may really like this book. It may absolutely tick all of your boxes, but just didn't for me. It was not what I expected, and I was ultimately disappointed. And then the final book that I managed to pick up and read was my book club's pick for the month. I run a book club called Just One More Page. I will leave the details to that down below if you're interested in joining us. It's a fantastic community. We have such a great time at our live Zoom discussions at the end of the month, and we look at a different genre each month. So this month we were looking at modern classics, and we read Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. Now I have read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I absolutely adored it. And when I first started reading this book, I thought, this is just going to be such a good book. Daphne du Maurier has an absolute way with words. The way that she can create atmosphere and the way that she can set the scene is just so good. I mean, this book starts in the month of November and it has an incredibly bleak setting, and it just felt like the perfect read for this time of year. Being cozy, nights getting darker, just the whole thing just lent itself extremely well to the setting of this book. So the basic premise is that we're following a young lady called Mary who sadly loses her mother at the beginning of the book, and so goes to live with her aunt and uncle, and they own an inn called Jamaica Inn, and it becomes really obvious to Mary right from the beginning that something dubious is taking place at Jamaica Inn, and we sort of follow Mary as she begins to uncover exactly what is going on. And she finds friends in a few places, but she lives a very isolated existence. Honestly, this book was okay. As I say, it was really atmospheric. There is a little bit of back and forth between Mary and one of our other characters, Jem, which I really enjoyed. I thought that it was sharp and acerbic and snappy, and I definitely enjoyed that interaction and reading it. What I would say is that you can very much tell that this was one of Daphne du Maurier's earlier books. And actually it came up a few times in our discussion at the end of the month that we were all just kind of expecting a little bit more from it, and she lays the foundations for the book to go in a number of different directions, and there is so much momentum and there was so much anticipation that it could just fly, and then it just didn't. It kind of like built and built and built, and then it just sort of fizzled out and trailed off, and it was so disappointing because it could just have been fantastic. And as I say, there are various different elements that she introduced, and it was like, okay, oh, okay. And it was such a shame because yeah, the book had huge potential. I think it was still really enjoyable. I gave it 3.5 stars. I would definitely want to read more of Daphne du Maurier's books. Again, very readable, very atmospheric. I really liked the characters that she created, and I like that she challenged some of the stereotypes and some of the things that were very accepted at the time that she was writing this. So she challenges sexual inequality and that kind of thing. Really liked that, thought that was really on point. Yeah, it was good. It was a page turner. It wasn't a huge thriller. I somehow thought that this was a ghost story, and I don't know where I got that from, but I was rather pleased to discover that it wasn't, because I'm currently reading Ninth House, which is basically a ghost story, and it's freaking the living daylights out of me, I cannot tell you. So very glad that that's not what this was about. I actually don't want to tell you too much about what Mary uncovers, because I think if you're going to read it, it's best to be surprised. I think that is a good way to picking it up. But yeah, in terms of building a sense of suspense, in terms of building atmosphere, in terms of capturing this bleak setting and this sense of hopelessness that sort of encompasses everything that is about Jamaica Inn, I thought Daphne du Maurier did a fantastic job of that. I've just had an absolute coughing fit. I don't know if you can see my eyes have gone all watery. I'm really nearly close to finishing the end of this video. All I wanted to say was I would definitely recommend it, but I do think if you've read some of her later work, you need to go in with the expectation that it's a little bit weaker than those books, but enjoyable nonetheless, and definitely a good one to read in the month of November. So there you go, they are the books that I read during the month of November. Short and snappy. I hope that you all had a great reading month in November. Do let me know what your favourite book was. Let me know if you've also read any of the ones I talked about and what you thought. As always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up. I am super close to my next subscriber milestone, and I would really appreciate it if you are not subscribed already, if you would. As always, I hope that you are all well, keeping safe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.